Hey guys, tonight we begin with something darker than you might expect. A world of painted faces, silk whispers, and secrets hidden behind fans that could cut deeper than any blade. We're diving into the enigmatic universe of the Geisha, those mysterious figures who have captivated imaginations for centuries. But forget everything you think you know. The movies, the books, the fantasies. Tonight, we're peeling back the white makeup to reveal a truth far more complex, far more haunting, and infinitely more human than any Hollywood script dared to show. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in Kyoto, 1920. The morning light filters through paper screens, casting delicate shadows across tatami mats. But this isn't a romantic awakening. This is the beginning of a performance that will consume your entire existence. You are a geisha, though that word means nothing like what the world believes it does. You are not a prostitute in silk clothing. You are not a submissive doll created for male pleasure. You are something far more complex, far more dangerous, and infinitely more tragic. You are a living work of art who has sacrificed her humanity for perfection. A master manipulator disguised as a servant. A woman who wields enormous influence while appearing to have none at all. You are a geisha, and your life is a beautiful lie wrapped in layers of silk and tradition, so thick that even you have forgotten where the performance ends and the person begins. The world sees you gliding through the narrow streets of the Hanamachi, your white painted face catching lantern light like porcelain, your elaborate kimono rustling with the sound of expensive secrets. They see grace. They see mystery. They see an exotic fantasy made flesh. What they don't see is the little girl who was sold into this life before she could write her own name. They don't see the years of training that broke your spirit down and rebuilt it in the image of other people's desires. They don't see the debt that binds you tighter than any obi sash ever could. But tonight, we're going to see it all. We're going to walk in your impossible shoes, feel the weight of your elaborate hair ornaments, and understand why your smile never quite reaches your eyes. Because the story of the geisha isn't a story of exotic entertainment. It's a story of survival, of artistry born from desperation, of women who turn their cages into stages, and their pain into the most sophisticated performance art the world has ever seen. The Western world first glimpsed your kind through the eyes of sailors and merchants who returned from Japan with tales of impossibly beautiful women who could sing like angels and converse like philosophers. These men, starved for mystery in their own pragmatic cultures, painted you as something between a saint and a courtesan, never quite understanding that you were neither and both, and something else entirely. Hollywood took these half-understood whispers and created its own mythology. Madame Butterfly, Memoirs of a Geisha, countless films that dressed Western actresses in your kimono and called it authentic. They showed geishas as tragic figures pining for Western men, as exotic objects to be possessed, as symbols of an Orient that existed only in colonial fantasies. Each movie, each book, each piece of art created about you built the walls of misunderstanding higher until the real geisha disappeared entirely behind a curtain of Orientalist dreams. But you know the truth. You know that your white painted face isn't makeup, it's armor. You know that your elaborate costume isn't decoration. It's a uniform that signals your position in a complex social hierarchy. You know that your seemingly submissive demeanor masks a mind sharp enough to cut through the pretensions of powerful men and skilled enough to manipulate them without them ever realizing it. You are not the geisha of Western imagination. You are something far more formidable and far more heartbreaking. You are a woman who has been systematically erased and reconstructed according to an ideal of femininity so refined, so impossibly perfect, that it could only be achieved by destroying everything natural and human about yourself. The tourists who visit modern Kyoto don't understand this. They see the maiko, the apprentice geishas, posing for photographs in the Gion district, and they think they're witnessing tradition. They don't understand that what they're seeing is the ghost of something that died decades ago, kept alive for their cameras and their foreign currency. They don't understand that the real geisha world, your world, was built on suffering so profound and artistry so demanding that it couldn't survive contact with the modern world. But tonight, we're going back. Back to when the flower and willow world was real, when geishas held actual power, when your painted face could launch political careers or destroy business empires with a single raised eyebrow. We're going to live your life, hour by hour, day by day, from the moment you were handed over as a child to the moment you finally understood that you had become something that wasn't quite human anymore. You'll feel the weight of debt that made you property before you understood what property meant. You'll experience the physical pain of transformation, the way your natural hair was replaced with elaborate wigs, the way your natural smile was replaced with something calculated and perfect. You'll understand the loneliness of being desired by everyone and known by no one, of being the most celebrated woman in the room while feeling invisible even to yourself. But you'll also understand the power, the way a gesture from your fan could signal approval or disapproval that could make or break a business deal. The way your presence at a tea house gathering could legitimize or destroy political alliances. The way your apparent powerlessness became the source of influence so subtle and so profound that men never realized they were being manipulated until it was far too late. This is your story. Not the story the world wants to tell about you, but the story you lived. The story of a woman who became a living embodiment of an impossible ideal, who sacrificed everything human about herself to become art, and who wielded power through the very chains that bound her. The journey we're about to take isn't comfortable. It's not romantic. It's not the exotic fantasy that has captivated the Western imagination for over a century. It's the truth about what it means to become a geisha, what it costs, what it offers, and why, even knowing everything we're about to discover, women still chose this life. Because in the end, your story isn't just about geishas. It's about the impossible choices women make when they have no choices at all. It's about the way beauty can become a prison and art can become a form of survival. It's about the price of perfection and the human cost of becoming a living symbol rather than a living person. So take a breath, adjust your obi, check your makeup in the mirror one last time. Tonight, you are going to understand what it really means to be a geisha, and you're going to discover that the truth is far stranger, far more tragic, and far more powerful than any myth the world has ever created about you. The performance is about to begin, and this time, you're not watching from the audience. You're the one behind the painted mask, and there's nowhere to hide. You are 7 years old, and today, your childhood ends forever. Not gradually, not gently, but with the finality of a door slamming shut in winter. Your parents, faces etched with shame and desperation, have just handed you over to the Okasan, the mother of a geisha house in Kyoto's Gion district. They've taken money for you. Not much, but enough to keep your siblings fed through the harsh months ahead. You don't understand this yet. All you know is that your mother won't look at you when she says goodbye. The Okasan examines you like a piece of fruit at market, tilting your chin up to catch the light, checking your teeth, your posture, the shape of your hands. She's calculating something in her head, weighing your potential against the years of investment you'll require. Beautiful enough, she decides. Young enough to be molded. Old enough to begin earning back your purchase price within a decade if you survive the training. Welcome to the flower and willow world, where children are planted like seeds in ground made fertile by centuries of suffering and tradition. You've just become property, though no one will use that word. They'll call you a daughter of the house, an apprentice, a future artist. But the contracts your parents signed tell a different story. You belong to this place now, bound by debt that grows with every meal you eat, every lesson you receive, every silk thread woven into your future costume. The Okasan leads you through narrow corridors lined with portraits of former geishas, their painted faces watching you with expressions you can't read yet. The house smells of incense, rice powder, and something else, something sweet and cloying that you'll later recognize as the scent of expensive loneliness. Your new sisters, girls ranging from your age to their early teens, peek out from doorways like curious cats. Some look at you with pity, others with relief that they're no longer the newest sacrifice. You're given a sleeping mat in a room with 5 other girls, a wooden pillow that will train your neck to hold elaborate hairstyles, and a single kimono made of rough cotton. The silk will come later, they tell you, after you've proven yourself worthy of such investment. For now, you wear the uniform of potential, of a life that might become valuable if you can endure what's coming. The training begins immediately, not gently, not with consideration for your age or the trauma of separation from your family. The geisha world doesn't coddle its investments. Every day starts before dawn with exercises designed to perfect your posture, your walk, the way you hold your hands. Your natural movements, the unconscious gestures of childhood, are systematically identified and eliminated. You must unlearn being human before you can learn being geisha. An older girl, perhaps 13, becomes your one-san, your big sister and tormentor. She teaches you the first lesson of survival in this place. Natural is wrong. The way you naturally stand is wrong. The way you naturally smile is wrong. The way you naturally speak is wrong. Everything about your authentic self is an error to be corrected through repetition, punishment, and the gradual erosion of your own instincts. Your hands are the first battlefield. They're soft now, unmarked by the calluses that will come from hours of shamisen practice. But they move wrong, gesture wrong, exist wrong in space. Your one-san binds them with silk cords, forcing them into positions that feel alien and painful. You'll hold these positions for hours, learning that pain is just another form of instruction, that your body belongs to the art you're being shaped to serve. The language lessons begin with the elimination of your natural voice, the dialect you learned from your parents, the rough edges of your rural accent, the spontaneous laughter that bubbles up when something delights you. All of this must be refined away, replaced with the careful, modulated tones of educated Kyoto speech. You practice sentences for hours, repeating them until your throat is raw and the words feel foreign in your mouth. But it's not just about pronunciation. You're learning an entirely new vocabulary, the subtle language of the flower and willow world where nothing is ever said directly. Desire is expressed through the angle of a fan. displeasure through the way tea is poured, availability through the color of your lipstick. You're being taught to communicate in symbols and suggestions, to say everything while appearing to say nothing at all. The other girls tell you stories in whispers after the lights go out. Stories of girls who tried to run away and were brought back with their heads shaved in shame. Stories of children who couldn't master the arts and were sold to less prestigious houses. Houses where the training was harsher and the future dimmer. Stories of lucky ones who became so skilled that they eventually bought their own freedom, though none of them can point to a single example of this actually happening. You learn to sleep with your neck elevated on that wooden pillow, training your spine to maintain the perfect posture that will one day support elaborate hairstyles weighing several pounds. Your natural sleep position, curled up like any normal child, is forbidden. Even unconscious, you must be practicing to be perfect. Even in dreams, you're rehearsing for a role you don't understand yet. Food becomes another form of education. Not just what you eat, but how you eat it. The portions that will keep you slim enough to wear the fitted kimono. The way you hold chopsticks, not just correctly, but elegantly. The speed at which you consume your meals, slow enough to appear refined, fast enough not to waste the Okasan's time. You're learning that every basic human function is now a performance, subject to judgment and correction. Your reflection in the mirror becomes foreign to you, not yet painted white, not yet transformed by professional makeup, but already changing. Your natural expressions are being replaced by carefully practiced ones. Your spontaneous smiles feel forced now, compared to the perfect curve you're learning to create with your lips. You're watching yourself disappear, piece by piece, replaced by something more valuable and infinitely more artificial. The debt accumulates like snow in winter, silent and overwhelming. Food, shelter, clothing, lessons, the interest on the money paid to your parents. Every day adds to what you owe. Every mistake increases the time you'll spend in bondage. The Okasan keeps careful records, numbers that represent years of your future, calculations that determine when or if you'll ever be free to choose your own life. But freedom is a concept that's being systematically erased from your vocabulary anyway. Freedom suggests alternatives, choices, the possibility of becoming something other than what this place is molding you into. And alternatives are dangerous to the investment the house is making in you. So you learn not to think about them. You learn to find satisfaction in small victories, in mastering a difficult dance step, or receiving a rare word of approval from your one-son. The older girls seem both magnificent and terrifying to you. Their movements have acquired the liquid grace you're struggling to achieve. Their voices carry the musical quality of trained instruments. Their faces, even without makeup, have learned to arrange themselves into expressions of perfect beauty and impenetrable mystery. But their eyes are different. Something in them has gone quiet, as if the person they once were is sleeping very deeply and might never wake up. You don't understand yet that you're seeing your own future. That the girl you are now, with her natural laugh and spontaneous gestures and unconscious beauty, is being systematically eliminated to make room for something else. Something more valuable in the flower and willow world's economy, but something that will never again belong entirely to itself. The seasons change outside the windows of the Geisha house, but inside, time moves differently. Not in days or weeks, but in tiny increments of progress toward an impossible standard of perfection. You're learning to measure your life not in happiness or fulfillment, but in the gradually increasing value of your potential. You're becoming an investment that must eventually pay dividends, a work of art that someone else is creating using your body and spirit as raw materials. And slowly, gradually, you're beginning to understand that this is forever. That the girl your parents sold isn't just temporarily separated from her family, but permanently transformed into something else, something beautiful, valuable, and profound. Yes, but also something that will never again be free to simply exist without performing, to speak without calculating, to love without considering the economics of desire. You are being broken down so you can be rebuilt. And the rebuilding hasn't even begun yet. The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the truth either. Not anymore. You sit before it in the dim morning light, watching as experienced hands transform you from human being into living artwork. This is your daily metamorphosis, the ritual that erases yesterday's girl and births today's geisha. The process takes 2 hours when done properly. 2 hours of systematic obliteration of everything natural about your face. The white makeup comes first, mixed fresh each morning from rice powder and water until it reaches the consistency of liquid porcelain. Your wonsan applies it with a bamboo brush, starting at your hairline and working downward, painting over your eyebrows, your natural lip color, even the soft pink of your eyelids. The coverage must be perfect, flawless, creating a blank canvas where your human features once lived. One streak, one uneven patch, and you'll start over. The white isn't just makeup, it's erasure. Beneath that perfect pallor, your expressions die. Your natural blush disappears. The subtle changes that normally cross a human face, the micro-expressions that reveal genuine emotion, all vanish beneath the porcelain mask. You're learning that to be beautiful in this world means to be unreadable. That mystery isn't about what you hide, but about becoming something that can't be read at all. Your lips come next, painted into a shape that has nothing to do with their natural form. Small, precise, like a flower bud that will never quite bloom. The red is applied with a tiny brush, each stroke deliberate, creating a mouth designed not for eating or speaking naturally, but for suggesting desires that can never be directly expressed. The lip color itself tells a story to those who can read it. Deep red for full geishas, lighter shades for apprentices, each hue marking your exact position in the hierarchy. The eyes require the most skill. Black liner extends your natural lash line, creating shapes that make your eyes appear larger, more doll-like, less human. Red accents at the corners suggest passion held carefully in check. Your eyebrows, erased by the white base, are redrawn in positions that have nothing to do with where they naturally grow. Everything is stylized, perfected, removed from the realm of the authentic and elevated into pure aesthetic. But the transformation isn't just superficial. As the makeup covers your face, something deeper changes. The girl you were this morning, with her natural expressions and unconscious gestures, becomes inaccessible. Try to smile naturally now, and it looks grotesque against the painted perfection. Try to frown, and the makeup cracks. You're learning to inhabit a new face, one that requires new expressions, new ways of being. The kimono is an engineering marvel disguised as clothing. Layer upon layer of silk, each piece positioned with mathematical precision. The hadajuban, the thin cotton undergarment that will absorb the sweat of performance. The nagajuban, the silk under kimono, whose collar shows at your neckline and must coordinate perfectly with your outer garment. Then the kimono itself, 12 feet of hand-painted silk that costs more than most people earn in a year. Dressing you isn't something you do yourself. It's a collaborative effort requiring the help of your wonsan and sometimes additional assistants. The obe, The elaborate sash that wraps around your waist is a work of art in itself. Properly tied, it weighs 15 pounds and requires 20 feet of silk brocade. The knot in the back is so complex, so architectural, that creating it is considered a specialized skill. You've seen obi that are worth more than the houses where your former classmates live. Each layer restricts your movement further. The kimono's narrow hem means you can take steps no longer than 6 inches. The tight wrapping around your torso means you can't raise your arms above shoulder height. The weight of the complete outfit, including the elaborate hair ornaments, means you must move with careful deliberation or risk falling. You're being dressed not for comfort or practicality, but for visual impact that comes at the cost of physical freedom. Your hair transformation is perhaps the most dramatic change of all. Your natural hair, which you haven't cut since arriving at the Geisha house, is now long enough to create the elaborate structures that will define your silhouette. But creating these styles requires violence against your scalp, pulling and pinning and lacquering until your hair becomes less like a living part of your body and more like an architectural element. The basic Shimada style requires your hair to be pulled so tightly that it stretches the skin of your forehead, creating an artificially high hairline and elongated face shape. Wooden combs and metal pins are driven deep into the structure, some penetrating so far they scrape against your skull. The pain is constant for the first few hours after styling, a throbbing reminder that beauty in this world is inseparable from suffering. The ornaments that decorate your hair aren't mere accessories. They're signals, messages, indicators of status and availability that can be read by those who understand the code. Seasonal flowers indicate your awareness of the natural calendar. Precious metals suggest the wealth of your patrons. The number and placement of pins reveal whether you're available for new relationships or committed to existing ones. Your head becomes a billboard advertising information you might not even understand you're broadcasting. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the transformation is how quickly you adapt to it. The girl who once ran freely through rice fields learns to take geisha steps. The child who once laughed without thinking learns to create the perfect suggestion of amusement without disturbing her makeup. The human being who once moved instinctively through the world learns to inhabit a body that has been redesigned according to someone else's aesthetic vision. The mirror shows you the final result, and it's breathtaking. You are, without question, a work of art. Every element of your appearance has been perfected, refined, elevated beyond the merely human into something approaching the divine. You are beautiful in a way that natural beauty can never achieve, mysterious in a way that genuine mystery can never match. You are perfect. But the face looking back at you isn't yours anymore. It belongs to the tradition, to the house, to the centuries of women who have undergone this same transformation. You are wearing the face of the idealized geisha, and beneath it, your actual face has become irrelevant. Your individual features, the unique arrangement of elements that made you recognizable to people who loved you, have been painted over, pinned back, perfected out of existence. The transformation is complete, but it's also daily. Tomorrow morning, you'll wash it all off and start again. The ritual will become so routine that you'll forget what you look like without it. You'll begin to feel more comfortable in your painted face than in your natural one. You'll start to believe that the artificial version is more real than the authentic one, more true to who you're becoming. And slowly, gradually, you'll understand that this isn't just about appearance. The physical transformation is preparing you for a deeper change, one that will affect not just how you look, but how you think, feel, and exist in the world. You're not just learning to wear the costume of a geisha, you're learning to become one, which means learning to be something that isn't quite human anymore. The girl in the mirror is beautiful beyond description, but she's also a stranger, wearing your body like an elaborate disguise. And the most terrifying part is that each day she becomes a little more real, and you become a little more like a memory she's trying to forget. The shamisen sits before you, like a serpent waiting to strike. 3 strings, a long neck, and a body covered in cat skin, stretched tight enough to create sounds that can cut through silk and bone alike. Your fingers, still soft from childhood, hover over the strings. Your one-san watches with the patience of a hunter, ready to pounce on every mistake, every moment of imperfection. This instrument will either become an extension of your soul or the implement of your destruction. The first lesson isn't about music, it's about pain. The shamisen strings are made of silk, twisted and tensioned to precise specifications, and they cut into untrained fingertips like wire through cheese. Your wanisan forbids you to use fingerpicks until you've developed proper calluses, proper technique, proper suffering. Blood on the strings, she tells you, means you're learning. Tears are acceptable, but stopping is not. You practice scales for hours, the same sequences repeated until your fingers move automatically, until the patterns exist in your muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. But this isn't just technical training. You're learning to make the shamisen sing with emotions you're not allowed to feel yourself. Joy that bubbles up from strings while your face remains perfectly composed. Sorrow that weeps from the instrument while your painted eyes stay dry. Passion that burns in the music while your heart remains carefully protected behind layers of professional distance. The dance training breaks your body down and rebuilds it according to principles that have nothing to do with natural human movement. Your wanasan demonstrates the kata, the prescribed forms that have been passed down for centuries without variation. Every gesture has meaning. Every step tells part of a story. Every turn of your head must be precise to the degree, every extension of your arm measured to the inch. Your natural grace, whatever small amount you possessed as a child, is irrelevant here. You must unlearn every instinctive way of moving and replace it with something artificial, something perfected, something that looks effortless precisely because it requires enormous effort to achieve. The dances tell stories of seasons changing, of lovers meeting and parting, of the eternal dance between desire and duty. But the emotions in the stories are stylized, refined, removed from the messy reality of actual human feeling. You learn to convey heartbreak through the angle of your wrist, to suggest seduction through the way you manipulate a fan, to indicate submission while actually controlling every element of the interaction through techniques so subtle that your audience doesn't realize they're being manipulated. The dances aren't entertainment. They're instruction manuals for psychological warfare disguised as art. But perhaps the most crucial skill you're developing is conversation. The deadly art of appearing to say nothing while communicating everything. You practice hours of dialogue with your one-san, learning to speak in layers, to embed multiple meanings in simple sentences, to answer questions without actually answering them. This isn't about being evasive. It's about being precise in ways that normal human communication never requires. You learn to read the micro-expressions of men who believe they're unreadable. The slight tightening around the eyes that indicates financial stress. The way a hand moves toward a sake cup when certain topics arise. The almost imperceptible change in posture that reveals political vulnerability. These men will pay enormous sums for your company, and part of what they're purchasing is your ability to understand them better than they understand themselves, while appearing to understand nothing at all. Your education includes subjects no normal school would teach. The intricate family trees of powerful clans, so you can navigate conversations about alliances and rivalries without accidentally triggering conflicts. The seasonal calendar of flowers and their symbolic meanings, so your poems and casual observations carry appropriate subtexts. The complex protocols of gift-giving and receiving, where the value, timing, and presentation of presents communicate relationships and intentions more clearly than words ever could. You study the art of reading rooms, of understanding power dynamics from the way people position themselves, from who speaks first and who remains silent, from the quality of sake being served and the formality of the table settings. You're being trained to be an intelligence gatherer disguised as decoration, a strategic advisor disguised as entertainment, a power broker disguised as a powerless woman. The poetry lessons teach you to compose verses that seem spontaneous, but are actually carefully crafted to achieve specific emotional effects. You learn to reference classical literature so subtly that only the most educated listeners catch the allusions, making them feel sophisticated while also establishing your own intellectual credentials. Your poems aren't expressions of your inner life. They're diplomatic communications disguised as art. But the cruelest part of your artistic education is learning to perfect skills you'll never be allowed to use for your own enjoyment. You become a master of musical expression while being forbidden to express your own emotions. You develop the ability to move with breathtaking grace while being restricted to movements that serve other people's aesthetic preferences. You learn to speak with unprecedented eloquence while being prohibited from saying anything true about your own experience. Every evening, your one son evaluates your progress with the cold assessment of someone appraising livestock. Your shamisen technique is improving, but your fingering on the high notes still shows hesitation. Your dance movement has gained fluidity, but your facial expressions don't perfectly match the emotional content of the choreography. Your conversation skills are developing, but you're still occasionally allowing genuine reactions to flicker across your features. Each critique is followed by additional hours of practice, correction, refinement. The margin for error shrinks daily as you progress toward the moment when you'll be presented to actual clients, when your skills will be tested against the standards of men who are paying for perfection. There are no participation trophies in the flower and willow world. There is only success or failure, profitability or liability, art or waste. You practice scenarios obsessively, how to enter a room in a way that suggests both availability and exclusivity, how to pour tea so that the gesture appears humble while actually demonstrating your superior training, how to laugh at jokes that aren't funny without appearing false, how to deflect inappropriate advances without giving offense, how to make every man in your presence feel like the most important person in the room while actually controlling the entire dynamic of the interaction. The other girls in training become both your community and your competition. You practice together, sharing techniques and corrections, but you're also being ranked against each other, compared and evaluated for future investment. The house will put more resources into training the girls who show the most promise, and less promising students may find themselves transferred to houses with lower standards and dimmer prospects. This creates a strange dynamic where your closest companions are also threats to your future. You help each other master difficult techniques, but you also watch for weaknesses you can exploit, for advantages you can maintain. The bonds you form are real, but they're tested constantly by the knowledge that the geisha world has room for only a limited number of stars, and everyone else will spend their careers in supporting roles. Your natural talents, whatever they were, are being systematically identified and either enhanced or suppressed depending on their usefulness to your future role. If you had a gift for comedy, you'll learn to use it only in ways that enhance rather than overshadow your clients. If you were naturally serious, you'll learn to project lightness when the situation demands it. If you were born with unusual beauty, you'll learn to downplay it when necessary to avoid threatening other women or making men feel inadequate. Everything natural about you is being processed through the requirements of your profession, refined and redirected until you become a perfectly calibrated instrument for other people's pleasure and advancement. You're not learning to be yourself more perfectly. You're learning to be whatever each situation requires, to become a human chameleon whose true colours have been carefully hidden beneath layers of training so sophisticated that even you begin to forget what they were. The skills accumulate like sediment, layer upon layer of artificial accomplishment building up until they bury whatever authentic abilities you might have possessed. And the most disturbing realization is that you're good at this. Despite the pain, despite the restrictions, despite the constant pressure, you're developing into something remarkable. Your shamisen playing moves audiences. Your dancing commands attention. Your conversation makes powerful men feel charming and intelligent. You're becoming exactly what they're trying to create. And the part of you that remembers being something else is growing smaller and quieter each day until it barely whispers even in your dreams. The tea house falls silent when you enter, but it's not the silence of respect. It's the silence of evaluation, of powerful men calculating your worth like merchants appraising silk. You are 15 now, no longer a child in training, but not yet a full geisha. Tonight marks your first real performance before clients, your debut as something valuable enough to rent by the hour. The weight of expectations presses down on you heavier than your elaborate costume. 3 men sit on silk cushions around a low table, their faces already flushed with expensive sake. The oldest is a textile merchant whose family has controlled the silk trade in Kyoto for generations. The second is a government official whose decisions about port regulations can make or break trading companies. The third is younger, perhaps 30, the heir to a banking fortune who dabbles in politics and poetry with equal incompetence. They watch you with the focused attention of hunters studying prey. Your Wana-san whispers final instructions as you prepare to serve them. "Remember which man pours his own sake," she hisses. It means he feels insecure about his status. Notice who speaks first. He's trying to establish dominance. Watch for the one who doesn't laugh at the other's jokes. He's the real power in the room. You're not here to entertain them, she reminds you. You're here to read them, to understand them better than they understand themselves, and to use that knowledge without them ever realizing you possess it. You approach the table with the gliding steps you've practiced 10,000 times, each movement calculated to suggest both availability and untouchability. The kimono restricts your stride to tiny, precise steps that make your approach seem to last forever, building anticipation with every inch you cover. Your painted face reveals nothing, but behind the white mask, you're analyzing everything. The quality of their clothes, the way they position themselves relative to each other, the subtle signs of alliance and rivalry that will determine how this evening unfolds. The introductions are a careful dance of protocol. You must acknowledge each man's status while not appearing to favor anyone over the others. Your bow to the merchant is precisely calculated to show respect for his age and wealth without suggesting submission. Your greeting to the official acknowledges his political position, while maintaining the independence that makes you valuable rather than merely subservient. Your attention to the young banker balances recognition of his potential influence with subtle indication that potential is not the same as actual power. They ask you to play shamisen, and you position the instrument with movements that serve multiple purposes simultaneously. The way you hold it displays your hands to advantage while demonstrating your technical training. The piece you choose, a classical composition about seasonal change, allows you to showcase your musical skill while providing a safe topic for conversation afterward. Every choice you make serves several objectives at once, like a chess player who advances multiple strategies with each move. As you play, you watch their faces in your peripheral vision, noting which passages capture their attention and which leave them restless. The merchant appreciates technical precision, nodding almost imperceptibly during difficult passages. The official seems more moved by emotional expression, his eyes growing softer during the melancholy sections. The young banker appears more interested in watching you than listening to the music, studying your posture and the way your kimono drapes with the intensity of someone appraising artwork he might purchase. The conversation that follows is a minefield disguised as pleasantries. They discuss recent changes in trade regulations, and you must appear interested without expressing opinions that might align you with one side or another. They mention political figures you've been trained to recognize, and you must demonstrate awareness without revealing the depth of your knowledge. They make jokes that range from merely crude to actively offensive, and you must respond with precisely the right degree of amusement without appearing either prudish or encouraging. Every response you give is calculated on multiple levels. When the merchant complains about new taxes on imported silk, you express sympathy for his business challenges while avoiding any comment that might be interpreted as criticism of government policy. When the official mentions difficulties with subordinates who question his decisions, you offer gentle support for his authority while implying that wise leaders value input from those beneath them. When the young banker boasts about a recent investment success, you show appropriate admiration while subtly indicating that you understand the difference between luck and skill. But the real test comes when they begin probing more personal territory. The banker asks about your background, fishing for information about your family, your training, your debt situation. These questions seem casual, but they're actually attempts to assess your vulnerability, your availability, your price. You must answer without lying, while revealing nothing that could be used against you later. Your responses create the impression of openness while actually maintaining complete opacity about anything that matters. The merchant inquires about your artistic preferences, whether you favor traditional or modern compositions. This isn't about music. He's testing your flexibility, your willingness to adapt to client preferences, rather than insisting on your own artistic vision. Your answer indicates that you appreciate the depth of classical training while remaining open to contemporary innovations, suggesting both competence and adaptability without revealing personal preferences that might limit your appeal. The official asks about your opinions on the changing role of women in modern Japan. The question is a trap with multiple dangers. Too traditional an answer makes you seem backward and uninteresting. Too progressive a response suggests dangerous independence that might threaten male authority. You navigate between these extremes by expressing admiration for women who honor traditional values while adapting to contemporary circumstances, a position that sounds meaningful while actually saying nothing definitive. As the evening progresses, the men's tongues loosen with alcohol, and the real purpose of the gathering becomes clearer. This isn't just entertainment, it's a negotiation session disguised as leisure, a business meeting camouflaged as cultural appreciation. The textile merchant and the government official are discussing a potential partnership that would require regulatory approval. The young banker is evaluating both of them as potential allies in his own political ambitions. Your role is to facilitate these discussions without appearing to understand their significance. You refill sake cups at precisely the right moments to encourage confidences. You ask innocent questions that prompt the men to explain their positions more clearly to each other. You create an atmosphere of relaxed intimacy that makes them forget they're conducting business in front of a witness who is trained to remember everything. When tensions arise between the merchant and the official over the terms of their potential deal, you diffuse the conflict by suggesting a dance that requires their participation as audience. The performance you choose tells a story about compromise and mutual benefit, subtly reinforcing the advantages of cooperation over conflict. Your movements suggest harmony and balance, emotional states that unconsciously influence their negotiating positions. By the end of the evening, they've reached a preliminary agreement that satisfies all parties, and each man believes he's gotten the better end of the deal. They've also each become convinced that you find him particularly charming, more interesting than his companions, worthy of future private attention. You've accomplished this without favouring any one of them in any measurable way, creating individual experiences of preference through subtle variations in timing, attention, and response that each man interprets as personal chemistry. As they prepare to leave, each man expresses interest in engaging your services again. The merchant mentions a business dinner next week, where your presence would enhance the proceedings. The official suggests a private cultural consultation session to help him better understand artistic trends. The young banker inquires about your availability for a poetry appreciation evening at his private residence. You accept each invitation with apparent enthusiasm while committing to none of them specifically. Your responses suggest availability while maintaining the scarcity that drives up your value. You appear eager to please while actually controlling the terms of future interactions. You seem grateful for their attention while making them compete for yours. Your wonsan waits outside to escort you back to the geisha house, and her first question is about money. How much did they tip? What gifts did they offer? Which ones seem most likely to become a regular patron? The artistic and social aspects of the evening, which felt so important while they were happening, are immediately reduced to their economic significance. You're reminded that every gesture you made, every word you spoke, every note you played, was ultimately about generating revenue for the house that owns your contract. But as you walk through the darkened streets of Gion, you realize something that disturbs you more than the commercial nature of the transaction. You were good at it, better than good. You had read those men like children's books, anticipated their needs, manipulated their responses, controlled their interactions without them ever realizing it. You had wielded power through apparent powerlessness, influenced important decisions while seeming to have no opinions of your own. You had become exactly what they trained you to be, a perfect instrument for other people's purposes. And the most frightening part was how natural it had felt, how effortlessly you had slipped into the role, how little of your authentic self had been required or even available during the entire performance. The girl who had once run freely through rice fields was gone completely now, replaced by something far more sophisticated and infinitely more dangerous, something that could shape the decisions of powerful men while appearing to be nothing more than beautiful decoration, something that had learned to survive by becoming indispensable to the very people who owned her. You had passed your first test, but you were beginning to understand that success in this world meant the complete disappearance of anything that had ever been genuinely yours. The doors close behind you, and suddenly the performance ends. Not gradually, not with polite farewells, but with the brutal finality of stepping from stage to shadows. One moment, you are the perfect geisha, mysterious and alluring, controlling powerful men with the arch of an eyebrow. The next, you are property being discussed in whispered conversations between your oka-san and the mama-san of neighboring houses. Tonight's client is different from the merchants and officials you've entertained before. Ishikawa-san owns textile factories across 3 prefectures, controls shipping routes that determine the price of silk in half of Japan, and maintains residences in Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka. His interest in you isn't casual entertainment or even regular patronage. He's considering you for mizuage, the ceremony that will mark your transition from apprentice to full geisha, and the price being discussed makes your stomach clench with understanding you wish you didn't possess. Your Okasan counts money with the focused intensity of a monk at prayer. But these aren't the modest fees of evening entertainment. These are sums that represent years of your future, the cost of your virginity calculated against your potential earning power as a fully inducted geisha. The numbers they discuss are abstract to you, meaningless except for their magnitude, but you understand their significance in the hierarchical economy that owns your body. The other girls whisper about mizuage with the mixture of terror and anticipation that accompanies all major transitions in the flower and willow world. Some speak of it as liberation, the moment when apprentice becomes artist, when the long years of training finally culminate in professional status. Others describe it as the final death of whatever remained of their childhood selves, the moment when the last pretense of innocence is sold to the highest bidder. You've seen girls return from their mizuage ceremonies changed in ways that have nothing to do with technical loss of virginity. Something in their eyes shifts, a kind of final surrender that settles into their features like dust on forgotten furniture. They move differently afterward, with the careful precision of people who have learned that their bodies are not their own. That physical intimacy is just another performance skill to be mastered and monetized. Ishikawa-san's requirements are presented to you as negotiation points, though you understand you have no actual voice in these negotiations. He prefers the classical Shimada hairstyle to the more modern variations. He has specific preferences for kimono colors and patterns, favoring deep purples and gold accents that complement his own aesthetic sensibilities. He wants the ceremony to take place at his private residence rather than in a tea house, suggesting an intimacy that makes your skin crawl even as you nod agreement. The preparations begin weeks in advance, transforming you into a bride for a wedding that isn't a wedding, a celebration that has nothing to celebrate except the completion of your transformation from human being into luxury commodity. Your kimono for the occasion costs more than most families earn in a year, hand-painted with seasonal flowers whose symbolism references fertility, beauty, and the ephemeral nature of youth. Your hair ornaments are chosen to complement Ishikawa-san's family colors, subtle indicators of temporary ownership disguised as aesthetic choices. The makeup artist spends extra time perfecting your white base, creating a porcelain perfection that will photograph well for the formal portraits that will commemorate the occasion. These images aren't for your memories. They're documentation of the transaction, proof of the value delivered to the purchaser. But the most disturbing aspect of the preparation is the education you receive about the ceremony itself. Your one-san instructs you in behaviors and responses that have nothing to do with genuine intimacy and everything to do with creating a specific experience for your client. You learn to appear nervous but not reluctant, inexperienced but not ignorant, submissive but not passive. Every aspect of your supposed authentic response is choreographed as carefully as your stage performances. You practice conversations you might have with Ishikawa-san, responses to questions he might ask, reactions to initiatives he might take. Your natural responses, whatever they might be, are irrelevant to the performance he's purchasing. He wants the experience of deflowering a geisha, complete with all the cultural and aesthetic associations that fantasy entails. And your job is to provide that experience regardless of your actual feelings about the situation. The night arrives with the inevitability of winter, beautiful and terrible and impossible to avoid. Ishikawa-san's residence is a monument to wealth acquired through generations of successful exploitation, filled with art that costs more than the houses where your former neighbors live. He greets you with the formal courtesy due a valuable acquisition, his appreciation aesthetic rather than personal, focused on the successful completion of a transaction he's anticipated for months. The ceremony itself is smaller than you expected, witnessed only by the Oka-san who negotiated your sale, and a photographer whose discreet documentation will join similar images in Ishikawa-san's private collection. You perform the rituals of sake sharing and formal introductions with the precision of an actress who has rehearsed her role obsessively, each gesture perfect and perfectly hollow. When the witnesses withdraw and you're left alone with your purchaser, the last remnants of your childhood finally die, not in the physical act itself, which is brief and mechanical and less painful than you anticipated, but in the moment when you realize that you're performing even this, that even your most intimate responses have been shaped by your training, that there's no part of you left that hasn't been processed through the requirements of your profession. Ishikawa-san is satisfied with his acquisition, pleased with the value received for his investment. He compliments your training, your appearance, your performance with the detached appreciation of a connoisseur evaluating a successful purchase. His satisfaction has nothing to do with you as a person and everything to do with your success as a product, your ability to fulfill the fantasy he's bought access to. The money changes hands the next morning, sums that represent years of your future labor, but which you'll never see directly. Your debt to the geisha house is reduced by the amount of your sale price, but new expenses are added immediately. The cost of your ceremonial kimono, your elaborate hairstyling, your makeup and photography, the house's commission on the transaction. The mathematics of your bondage adjusts to accommodate your new status, but the fundamental equation remains unchanged. You are now a full geisha, entitled to higher fees and more prestigious clients, but also responsible for generating revenues that justify the house's continued investment in your career. The training wheels are off, the protection of apprentice status removed. You must now compete with established geishas for the attention of clients who have many options and little loyalty to performers who fail to maintain their interest. Your new professional name is chosen for you, replacing the childhood name you've already half forgotten with something that sounds more sophisticated, more marketable. The syllables feel foreign in your mouth, like speaking a language you've learned but never made your own. You practice signing it until the characters flow smoothly from your brush, but the signature feels like forgery, a representation of someone you're pretending to be. The other geishas welcome you to their ranks with the careful courtesy of competitors acknowledging a new rival. Some offer advice about managing client relationships and maintaining your earning potential. Others watch you with the calculating assessment of women who understand that the pie they're all competing for shares doesn't get larger just because another player joins the game. You move into quarters appropriate to your new status. A slightly larger room with better furnishings and a window that actually opens. The upgrade is real but modest, a reminder that even success in this world comes with carefully maintained limitations. You're valuable enough to deserve better treatment, but not valuable enough to threaten the fundamental structure that keeps you dependent on the house's continued goodwill. Your first clients as a full geisha treat you differently than they did when you were an apprentice. There's less patience for learning, higher expectations for perfection, increased pressure to justify the premium prices your services now command. The margin for error that existed during your training period disappears completely, replaced by standards that assume you've already mastered every aspect of your craft. But the most profound change is internal. The last connection to the girl you once were has been severed, sold to Ishikawa-san, along with your virginity. What remains is something more polished, more valuable, and infinitely more artificial. You've become exactly what they always intended you to become. A perfect instrument for other people's pleasure and advancement, calibrated to generate maximum revenue while maintaining the illusion of autonomous choice. The transformation is complete. The investment has paid off. The product is ready for market. And somewhere deep inside, buried beneath layers of training and performance and carefully applied makeup, the ghost of a 7-year-old girl who once ran freely through rice fields finally stops whispering entirely, leaving only the sound of silk rustling in empty rooms. The tea house hums with conversations that will reshape Japan's political landscape. But the men conducting these negotiations believe they're simply enjoying an evening of cultural refinement. You kneel gracefully between a steel magnate whose foundries fuel the empire's expansion and a naval minister whose decisions determine which ships protect Japan's growing maritime interests. To them, you're beautiful decoration, a living ornament that enhances the aesthetic pleasure of their meeting. They have no idea they're sitting next to the most informed woman in Kyoto. Power in the flower and willow world doesn't flow through official channels. It seeps through silk screens and whispered confidences, through sake-loosened tongues, and the intimate spaces where important men believe themselves unobserved. You've become a repository of secrets so valuable that foreign governments would pay fortunes for access to what you know. But your knowledge is trapped behind painted lips that can never speak directly of what they've heard. Tonight's conversation revolves around naval construction contracts worth millions of yen, decisions that will determine Japan's ability to project power across the Pacific. The steel magnate needs guarantees that his foundries will receive priority access to imported iron ore. The naval minister requires assurance that steel deliveries will meet impossible deadlines for battleship construction. Both men need something from the other, but neither wants to appear desperate for the partnership. Your role is to create the atmosphere where such delicate negotiations can succeed. You pour sake with timing that encourages confidences during vulnerable moments. You ask innocent questions that prompt each man to clarify his position for the other's benefit. You suggest traditional songs whose lyrics subtly reinforce themes of cooperation and mutual benefit. Every gesture serves multiple purposes, advancing negotiations while appearing to focus solely on hospitality. The steel magnate mentions production challenges that sound like routine industrial complaints, but actually reveal critical vulnerabilities in Japan's war preparation. Labor shortages in his foundries mean certain ship components will be delayed by months. Raw material shortages require purchasing inferior steel from questionable suppliers. Quality control problems have resulted in metal failures that could catastrophically weaken naval vessels under combat stress. The naval minister responds with seemingly casual comments about fleet deployment schedules that actually communicate state secrets of the highest classification. Which ships will be stationed where, when major naval exercises will occur, how Japan's defensive strategy assumes certain industrial capabilities that may not exist. He's revealing information that enemy intelligence services would kill to obtain, discussing it as naturally as ordering dinner. because he assumes his audience consists of patriots who would never betray such confidences. But you're not the only listener in the room. Other geishas serve different groups of men engaged in their own sensitive discussions. The textile manufacturer negotiating government contracts for military uniforms. The shipping executive whose vessels transport strategic materials between Japan and its overseas territories. The bank president whose financial instruments fund the empire's expansion. Each conversation reveals another piece of the vast puzzle that is Japan's preparation for conflicts that haven't been officially acknowledged yet. Over months and years, you accumulate knowledge that would make you invaluable to Japan's enemies or incredibly dangerous to its leaders if you ever chose to speak. You know which generals favor aggressive expansion and which prefer defensive strategies. You understand which industrial leaders are genuinely capable of meeting wartime production demands and which are inflating their capabilities to secure profitable contracts. You've heard discussions of military weaknesses that could be exploited by enemies who possessed such intelligence. Your memory becomes a classified archive that no government security apparatus controls or even knows exists. The men who trust you with their secrets assume your discretion not because they've verified your loyalty, but because they can't imagine that someone in your position could pose any real threat to their interests. They see a beautiful entertainer whose primary concerns are artistic excellence and client satisfaction, not an intelligence analyst whose understanding of Japan's strategic situation rivals that of the most senior government officials. But knowledge without the power to act on it becomes a form of exquisite torture. You understand the catastrophic implications of certain policy decisions, but you can't warn anyone without destroying yourself and everyone you care about. You recognize which military leaders are making strategic errors that will cost thousands of lives, but your only choice is to pour more sake and smile more beautifully while listening to them compound their mistakes. The weight of enforced silence grows heavier with each passing month. You attend meetings where officials discuss troop deployments that you know are based on flawed intelligence. You serve men who are negotiating arms purchases from suppliers whose products you've heard described as defective in other conversations. You watch Japan's leaders make decisions that you understand will lead to disaster, and your only response can be to ensure their sake cups never empty. Your position also grants you insight into the personal weaknesses of powerful men, knowledge that could be weaponized by anyone with access to it and the willingness to use it. You know which government ministers have gambling debts that compromise their judgment. You understand which military leaders have family members whose safety could be threatened to influence policy decisions. You've learned which industrialists are skimming profits from government contracts while delivering substandard materials for critical military applications. The naval minister you serve tonight has a son whose business dealings with foreign companies violate laws he helped write. The steel magnate maintains mistresses whose expenses are funded through defense contracts, creating financial vulnerabilities that enemy agents could exploit. Both men discuss these personal complications as casually as they reveal state secrets, trusting that your painted smile indicates ignorance rather than perfect comprehension. But the most dangerous knowledge you possess concerns the conversations between different groups, the contradictions and conflicts that reveal the chaos beneath Japan's appearance of unified purpose. Military leaders promise capabilities that industrial leaders know they can't deliver. Government officials make commitments that conflict with policies being developed in other ministries. Everyone assumes someone else is managing the overall coordination that actually doesn't exist. You begin to understand that Japan's strength is largely an illusion, maintained by men who don't communicate with each other effectively enough to recognize their collective weaknesses. The empire's expansion is built on assumptions that aren't being tested, promises that can't be kept, and strategies that depend on resources that don't exist. You're watching a house of cards being constructed by people who each assume someone else has verified the foundation's stability. The Geishas you work alongside accumulate similar intelligence, creating a network of involuntary spies whose combined knowledge would revolutionize any foreign government's understanding of Japan's true capabilities and vulnerabilities. But this network can never be activated, never coordinated, never used. The same training that makes you perfect listeners also ensures you can never speak, never organize, never act on what you know. Your power is absolute within the narrow confines of individual interactions, but it evaporates completely when you try to imagine using it for larger purposes. You can influence individual decisions through carefully calibrated charm and suggestion, but you can't change policies, prevent wars, or save the thousands of lives that you know will be lost because of the strategic errors you witness being planned. The tea house conversations continue night after night, revealing more secrets, exposing more vulnerabilities, demonstrating more clearly the gap between Japan's imperial ambitions and its actual capabilities. You become the unwilling keeper of knowledge that could change history, trapped in a body that belongs to other people and bound by training that makes betrayal literally unthinkable. And so you pour sake, arrange flowers, play shamisen, and watch an empire stumble toward catastrophe, while the men who could prevent it mistake your silence for ignorance and your powerlessness for loyalty. You have become the most informed and least influential person in Japan, a perfect spy who can never report what she's learned, a master of secrets who must take them to her grave. The painted smile never falters, but behind it, you're screaming. The ledger lies open before your Okasan like a book of fates, each line recording not just numbers, but years of your life calculated in precise monetary terms. You are 22 now, a full geisha for 7 years, and the mathematics of your existence have grown as complex as your performances. Tonight, she explains your financial situation with the dispassionate clarity of a banker foreclosing on a property, because that's essentially what you are, an asset whose value must be maximized before it begins to depreciate. Your initial purchase price from your parents, modest by today's standards, has grown exponentially through accumulated interest, training costs, and the house's overhead expenses. Room and board, calculated at rates higher than the finest hotels. Kimono and accessories, priced as if each thread was spun from gold. Lessons in music, dance, conversation and deportment, billed at fees that would bankrupt merchants. Medical care, cosmetics, hairstyling, photography for promotional materials. The list extends across multiple pages, each item representing another month or year added to your bondage. But these expenses pale beside the ongoing costs of maintaining your career. A single formal kimono suitable for high-level entertainment costs more than a craftsman's annual wages. The OB that complements it requires additional thousands. Hair ornaments, makeup, seasonal accessories, the constant replacement of items that wear out or become unfashionable. Your wardrobe represents an investment that could purchase several houses, but every piece belongs to the geisha house that continues to own your contract. The economics become even more complicated when you consider the revenue you generate. Your fees have increased dramatically since your mizuage ceremony, placing you among the more expensive entertainers in Kyoto's flower and willow world. A single evening's engagement can cost your clients more than most people earn in months. Private parties, cultural consultations, artistic collaborations, the various services you provide command premium prices that reflect your exceptional training and reputation. Yet the vast majority of this income flows directly to the house, covering not only your ongoing expenses, but also generating the profits that make the geisha business lucrative for those who own it. Your personal allowance, the small fraction of your earnings that you're permitted to keep, barely covers incidental expenses and modest personal purchases. The elaborate lifestyle that surrounds you belongs entirely to others, though you're the one who performs the labor that sustains it. Your okasan explains the debt calculation with mathematical precision that masks its fundamental cruelty. Every year you remain in service reduces your obligation, but slowly, incrementally, at rates that ensure your bondage will continue well into your 30s. The interest on your accumulated debt compounds annually, meaning that even as you generate substantial revenue, your financial freedom recedes like a mirage in the desert. But there are other numbers in the ledger, figures that represent opportunities for advancement within the system that owns you. Certain clients pay premiums for exclusive access to your services, arrangements that could dramatically increase your earning potential, while also extending your obligations to the house. Long-term patronage agreements that guarantee steady income in exchange for continued availability. Investment opportunities where wealthy admirers might purchase your contract entirely, transferring your ownership from the geisha house to private individuals. The most lucrative possibility involves finding a dana, a wealthy patron who would assume financial responsibility for your career in exchange for privileged access to your companionship. Such arrangements can be extraordinarily profitable, with monthly allowances that exceed most people's annual incomes. But they also represent a different form of bondage, transferring your obligations from institutional ownership to personal possession by men whose expectations extend far beyond public entertainment. Your okasan presents potential dana candidates like a marriage broker discussing advantageous alliances, though these relationships have nothing to do with marriage and everything to do with strategic economic partnerships. The textile manufacturer who has expressed interest in long-term patronage. The government official whose political connections could open doors to even more prestigious clients. The banking heir whose family wealth could provide security for decades, assuming his interest in you survives that long. Each potential patron offers different advantages and risks. The manufacturer's wealth is substantial, but tied to industries that could suffer during economic downturns. The official's political position provides access to powerful circles, but could become liability if his career falters. The banker's family fortune offers stability, but comes with social expectations that could limit your artistic independence. The negotiations for such arrangements involve complex calculations that treat you as both participant and commodity. Your preferences matter, but only insofar as they affect your performance and therefore your value to potential patrons. Your comfort with specific arrangements influences their success, but your consent is assumed rather than requested. You're expected to be grateful for opportunities that others might consider forms of sophisticated slavery. The most disturbing aspect of these financial discussions is how naturally you've learned to think in these terms. You evaluate potential patrons not as people you might care about, but as investment opportunities that could improve your economic position. You calculate the advantages of different arrangements with the cold precision of an accountant, because romantic sentiment is a luxury you can't afford when your survival depends on making optimal financial decisions. The other geishas share similar calculations, creating a competitive market where women bid against each other using their beauty, skills, and willingness to accept particular arrangements. Friendships strain under the pressure of competition for the most desirable patrons. Alliances form and dissolve based on changing financial opportunities. The bonds between women who share similar circumstances become complicated by the knowledge that each woman's success might come at the cost of others' opportunities. Your earning potential peaks in your 20s, making these years crucial for accumulating the resources that might eventually purchase your freedom. But freedom itself has become an abstract concept, something you understand intellectually, but can barely imagine practically. After 15 years in the Geisha house, you've lost the ability to envision life outside its structure. The skills that make you valuable here have no application in the ordinary world, and the ordinary world feels as foreign as another country. The mathematics of liberation are daunting even for the most successful geishas. The amount required to purchase your contract and establish independent living exceeds what most people accumulate in lifetimes of conventional work. The few women who achieve such independence often do so only after decades of service, when their beauty has faded and their earning potential has diminished to the point where freedom becomes economically feasible for their owners to grant. But there are alternative calculations, paths to financial independence that don't require purchasing your way out of bondage. Some geishas accumulate enough wealth and influence to open their own tea houses, becoming okasan themselves and owning the contracts of younger women. Others leverage their connections to wealthy patrons into business partnerships that provide income independent of their entertainment services. A few exceptional women parlay their cultural expertise into teaching positions or artistic careers that offer both financial stability and social respectability. These success stories provide hope, but they also illustrate the system's fundamental cruelty. Even the most successful geishas achieve independence by participating in the same structures that enslaved them, becoming owners rather than owned, exploiters rather than exploited. Freedom, when it comes, often requires complicity in the continued bondage of others. The ledger closes with numbers that will determine your immediate future, figures that represent years of your life calculated in precise financial terms. Your debt has decreased, but slowly. Your earning potential has increased, but conditionally. Your options have expanded, but within carefully maintained limits that ensure the house's continued profitability. You are 22 years old, at the peak of your beauty and skill, generating enormous wealth for others while accumulating modest resources for yourself. You are simultaneously one of the most valuable and most powerless people in Kyoto, a master of arts that serve others' purposes, while remaining enslaved by economic realities you didn't choose and can't escape. The mathematics are clear, precise, unforgiving. And somewhere in those calculations, the 7-year-old girl who was sold to purchase her family's survival has been completely erased, replaced by columns of numbers that define a life measured entirely in terms of its value to others. The shoji screen slides shut with the whispered finality of secrets being sealed away from the world. In this private chamber, decorated with paintings worth more than most people's homes, you are no longer performing for an audience of peers and rivals. Here, behind silk barriers that muffle sound and obscure sight, the careful rules of public geisha interaction dissolve into something more intimate, more dangerous, and infinitely more complex. Tanaka-san has been your most regular patron for 3 years now, a shipping magnate whose vessels carry Japan's ambitions across the Pacific. Tonight, like so many others, he has paid premium rates for your exclusive company, for the privilege of pretending that your attention is genuine, rather than purchased. He pours sake with the careful ceremony of a man who believes ritual can transform transaction into relationship, and you accept it with the practiced grace of someone who has learned to make every gesture appear spontaneous. The conversation begins, as it always does, with the elaborate fiction that you are here by choice. He asks about your day, your artistic pursuits, your thoughts on poetry and seasonal changes, as if you were a cultured woman friend rather than an entertainer whose time he has bought by the hour. You respond with the perfect balance of intelligence and deference, sharing observations that demonstrate your refinement while never forgetting that your role is to enhance his sense of sophistication rather than to express your own authentic thoughts. But as the evening progresses and the sake takes effect, the conversation shifts into territory that no public tea house would permit. He speaks of his loneliness, of the isolation that comes with wealth and power, of his growing conviction that you are the only person who truly understands him. His voice carries the desperation of a man who has confused professional empathy with personal connection, who has mistaken your skillful performance of interest for genuine affection. You listen with the focused attention that your training has made second nature. But beneath your perfect composure, something darker stirs. You know things about Tanaka-san that he has never directly told you. Secrets gathered from overheard conversations and careful observation. His shipping company is on the verge of bankruptcy, sustained only by government contracts that could disappear if certain officials learned about his gambling debts. His wife, whom he rarely mentions, has begun asking questions about his evening activities that suggest she's growing suspicious of his expenditures. The power dynamic in this room is far more complex than it appears. He believes he is purchasing your compliance, your attention, your carefully crafted approximation of desire, but you understand that his need for the illusion you provide has made him vulnerable in ways he doesn't recognize. His desperate hunger for connection that feels authentic gives you leverage over him that extends far beyond this private chamber. He reaches for your hand, and you allow the contact while maintaining the precise emotional distance that makes such intimacy possible. His touch is gentle, almost reverent, treating you like something precious rather than something owned. But the gentleness makes it worse somehow, because it requires you to participate in his fantasy that this interaction has meaning beyond its commercial foundation. Brutality would be easier to endure than this elaborate pretense of mutual affection. The physical intimacy that follows is choreographed as carefully as any dance performance, each response calculated to create the experience he's purchasing, while protecting the parts of yourself that aren't for sale. You've learned to separate your body from your consciousness during these encounters, to become an observer of your own performance rather than a participant in the interactions. It's a form of psychological survival that allows you to maintain sanity while selling access to experiences that should be reserved for genuine love. Afterward, as he sleeps beside you with the contentment of a man who believes he's found something real, you lie awake, calculating. His vulnerabilities could be exploited if you chose to use them. Information about his financial troubles could be valuable to his competitors. Knowledge of his emotional dependencies could provide influence over his business decisions. But using such leverage would violate the unspoken rules that govern relationships between geishas and their patrons, rules that protect both parties by maintaining careful boundaries around what can and cannot be acknowledged directly. The other geishas in your house navigate similar relationships with their own regular patrons, each woman managing the delicate balance between professional intimacy and personal protection. Some have learned to genuinely care for their clients, finding ways to create authentic affection within commercial structures. Others maintain perfect emotional detachment, treating every interaction as pure performance. Most, like you, exist somewhere between these extremes, developing complicated feelings that have no clear category or resolution. The relationships create their own forms of bondage beyond the financial obligations that legally bind you to the geisha house. Tanaka-san's emotional dependence on you means that disappointing him could result in lost income that affects not just your own situation, but the house's profitability. His expectations for exclusive access to your attention create scheduling constraints that limit your ability to develop relationships with other patrons. His growing possessiveness suggests that he may eventually demand arrangements that would further restrict your independence. But the most disturbing aspect of these intimate relationships is how they affect your capacity for authentic connection with anyone else. The skills that make you successful with clients, the ability to read and respond to others' needs while suppressing your own, have become so ingrained that you can't turn them off even when you want to. Your interactions with other geishas, with servants, with anyone in your daily life carry the performative quality that you've developed for professional survival. The boundaries between authentic self and professional persona have blurred beyond recognition. You no longer know which of your responses are genuine and which are calculated, which emotions are real and which are strategic. The constant performance has created a psychological state where performance becomes the only reality you can access, where your authentic self has become so deeply buried that you're not sure it exists anymore. Some nights, lying beside men who believe they've purchased access to your inner life, you try to locate something in yourself that feels untouched by commerce, uncontaminated by the necessity of pleasing others. But those searches yield only emptiness. Spaces where spontaneous feeling once lived before it was systematically replaced by professional competence. You've become so skilled at being what others need that you've lost the ability to know what you might want for yourself. The isolation becomes absolute despite constant human contact. You are never alone, but you are always lonely, surrounded by people who know only the version of yourself that you've created for their consumption. Even your relationships with other geishas carry the competitive edge that prevents complete honesty, the knowledge that expressing vulnerability might be used against you in the ongoing struggle for survival and advancement. The private chambers become stages for the most intimate performances, spaces where the gap between fantasy and reality must be maintained with perfect precision. Too much authenticity threatens the illusion that clients are purchasing. Too little risks failing to provide the emotional connection that justifies their continued patronage. You become a master of calibrated intimacy, skilled at creating experiences that feel genuine while remaining fundamentally artificial. And in the quiet moments after clients have fallen asleep, when the performance finally ends and you're left alone with the consequences of what you've just done, you understand that this is the price of survival in the flower and willow world. Not just the physical acts, but the psychological erosion, the gradual replacement of authentic human connection with sophisticated simulation, the transformation of your capacity for love into a commodity that can be rented by the hour. The shoji screen that separated you from the world becomes a metaphor for your entire existence, a barrier that protects your privacy while also imprisoning you in spaces where reality and performance become indistinguishable. Behind every screen lies another performance, another carefully constructed interaction, another moment when you must choose between authenticity and survival. And survival always wins. The okiya is never silent, but tonight the sounds are different. Instead of the usual rustle of silk and whispered conversations about clients, there's an undercurrent of tension that makes every footstep seem too loud, every breath too sharp. You and your geisha sisters move through the evening routines with the mechanical precision of women who have learned that survival sometimes requires ignoring the obvious until it becomes unavoidable. Matsuko-san sits in the corner, her once perfect posture now curved with exhaustion that goes deeper than physical fatigue. At 31, she's reached the age where the flower and willow world begins its slow, merciless process of discarding what it once treasured. Her regular clients have started requesting younger entertainment. Her fees have begun their gradual descent toward rates that barely cover the house's expenses. Tonight, she received the news that every aging geisha dreads. Her contract won't be renewed at the end of the season. The mathematics of her situation are brutal in their clarity. She's too old to command premium prices, but too young to transition into the respected role of Okasan training the next generation. Her savings, carefully accumulated over 15 years of service, aren't sufficient to purchase her independence or establish her own tea house. The skills that made her valuable within the geisha world have no application outside it. She faces the prospect of transitioning to lower-tier establishments or worse, leaving the only life she's known for over 2 decades with nowhere to go. You watch her apply her makeup with the same meticulous care she's maintained throughout her career. But tonight, her hands shake slightly as she creates the perfect white mask. She knows this might be among the last times she performs this ritual, the daily transformation that has defined her existence for so long. The face looking back from the mirror is still beautiful, but it's a beauty that the market has decided is no longer valuable enough to sustain. Yukiko-san, barely 17, and in her first year as a full geisha, observes Matsuko-san with the mixture of sympathy and terror that accompanies all glimpses of potential futures. She represents everything the industry values: youth, innocence, the kind of fresh beauty that commands the highest prices from clients seeking experiences that feel untainted by previous transactions. But watching Matsuko-san's decline, she's beginning to understand that her current value is temporary, that the very qualities that make her precious today will inevitably become liabilities. The conversations between sisters take on different tones depending on which stage of the life cycle they represent. The younger geishas speak in whispers about techniques for maintaining their appeal, remedies for preserving youth, strategies for building relationships with wealthy patrons who might provide long-term security. The middle-aged women discuss transition planning, alternative career possibilities, the delicate negotiations required to secure positions as instructors or house managers. But underlying all these conversations is the awareness that the geisha system is built on disposability, that its economic foundation requires a constant supply of young women to replace those who age out of desirability. The same training that creates your extraordinary skills also ensures your eventual obsolescence, because the arts you've mastered are valued primarily as vessels for youth and beauty, rather than as achievements worthy of respect in their own right. The bonds between sisters become complicated by this reality. You genuinely care for each other, having shared experiences that no one outside this world could understand. But you're also competitors in a market with limited resources, where one woman's success often comes at the cost of another's opportunities. The kindness you show Matsuko-san is real, but it's shadowed by the knowledge that her departure will create space for others to advance. Your own position, secure for now in your mid-20s, feels less stable when viewed against the trajectory of women who came before you. The clients who currently compete for your attention will eventually grow tired of your familiar charms and begin seeking newer faces. The skills that seem so valuable today will remain impressive, but become insufficient to command premium prices. The beauty that currently defines your worth will fade with mathematical certainty. The house management begins preparing for transitions with the dispassionate efficiency of a business replacing worn equipment. Matsuko-san's room will be reassigned to a younger geisha whose earning potential justifies better accommodations. Her kimono collection, technically owned by the house, will be redistributed to women whose bodies can showcase it to better advantage. Her regular clients will be introduced to alternative entertainment options before they have a chance to request her specifically. The process is handled with professional courtesy that can't disguise its fundamental cruelty. Matsuko-san is thanked for her years of service, complimented on her professionalism, offered modest assistance in finding alternative employment. But the warmth in these interactions is the kind extended to valuable property that has served its purpose, rather than to a human being whose life is being dismantled. The practical arrangements for her departure reveal how completely the geisha world has owned her existence. She has no family connections to return to, having been separated from them for so long that those relationships have withered beyond repair. She has no experience with ordinary employment, having spent her entire adult life in a highly specialized profession that has no equivalent in conventional society. She has no savings adequate to sustain independent living for more than a few months. Some aging geishas find positions in lower-tier establishments that cater to clients with smaller budgets and lower expectations. Others transition to working in conventional restaurants or tea houses, using their hospitality skills in less prestigious but more stable environments. A few lucky ones secure marriages to men who value their cultural accomplishments enough to overlook their professional backgrounds. But many simply disappear from the flower and willow world without anyone tracking where they go or how they survive. The younger geishas begin to understand that their current success is borrowed from their future selves, that every year of earning peak fees brings them closer to the moment when those fees will begin declining. The pressure to accumulate resources while they're still valuable creates a psychological tension that affects every decision they make. Save money for an uncertain future, or spend it maintaining the appearance that generates current income. Invest in relationships that might provide long-term security, or focus on maximizing immediate earning potential. Your own calculations become more urgent as you witness Matsuko-san's departure. The patrons who seem devoted to you today may lose interest tomorrow. The skills that feel like permanent assets could become obsolete if cultural tastes shift. The beauty that currently defines your value is already beginning its gradual decline, imperceptible for now, but as inevitable as seasonal change. The sisterhood becomes a support network for managing these anxieties, but it's also a constant reminder of the cycle that awaits everyone. You comfort each other during moments of crisis, while privately calculating your own positions in the hierarchy. You share strategies for extending careers, while competing for the resources that might make such extensions possible. You express genuine affection, while maintaining the emotional distance necessary to survive in a system that will eventually discard all of you. The house continues operating with the same elegant efficiency that has sustained it for generations, processing women through its programs of transformation and disposal like a beautifully decorated factory. New girls arrive to begin their training, just as aging geishas receive notice of their termination. The silk screens and polished floors witness the same conversations, the same hopes and fears and desperate calculations, repeated endlessly with different faces but identical themes. And through it all, you perform your duties with the perfect grace that your training has made automatic. You entertain clients who have no idea that you're calculating how many more years you can maintain their interest. You practice arts that have become second nature while wondering what value they might have in a world that doesn't measure women's worth by their ability to pour tea and play shamisen with perfect precision. The flower and willow world continues its eternal dance of beauty and commerce, transformation and disposal, creating and discarding human artwork with the ruthless efficiency of a system that has perfected the conversion of women's lives into profitable entertainment. And you remain trapped within it, simultaneously its most valuable product and its inevitable victim, dancing gracefully toward your own planned obsolescence while maintaining the smile that has become your professional signature. The sisterhood watches, supports, and endures, knowing that solidarity can ease the pain, but can't change the fundamental mathematics of a world that treats women as renewable resources in an endless cycle of cultivation and harvest. The air raid sirens scream across Kyoto like wounded ghosts, their wailing voices carrying news that will shatter your world more completely than any earthquake ever could. It's 1943, and the war that once seemed like distant thunder has arrived at your doorstep with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Through the paper windows of your Okiya, you can see the searchlights sweeping the sky, hunting for American bombers that carry death in their silver bellies. Your silk kimono feels absurd now, a costume from a play that nobody wants to watch anymore. The elaborate hair ornaments that once marked your status as a premier entertainer seem grotesquely frivolous when food rations shrink weekly and young men disappear into uniform to die for the emperor's glory. The flower and willow world, which had seemed eternal and unchanging, crumbles like cherry blossoms in a typhoon. The clients who once competed for your attention have vanished into military service or war production. Tanaka-san, your devoted patron for 3 years, received his commission as a naval officer and sailed toward battles he won't survive. The tea houses that hosted elaborate negotiations between powerful men now sit empty, their sliding doors sealed against a reality that has no patience for aesthetic refinement or cultural sophistication. Your Okasan gathers the remaining geishas in the main room, her painted face struggling to maintain composure as she explains what the war means for your profession. The government has declared geisha entertainment a non-essential luxury, inappropriate during times of national sacrifice. Your licenses are being revoked, your contracts terminated, your artistic training, 15 years of disciplined perfection, has been rendered worthless by imperial decree. But the cruelest irony is that you're not being liberated, you're being reassigned. The same government that has decided your skills are useless still owns your labor, and it has other plans for your hands. You'll be transferred to munitions factories, where your dexterity will serve the war effort by assembling weapons. Your graceful movements will guide artillery shells into their casings. Your perfect posture will help you endure 12-hour shifts manufacturing death for distant enemies. The transformation begins immediately, and it's more violent than any change you've experienced since childhood. The white makeup that defined your identity is forbidden, replaced by the grey dust of factory floors. The silk kimono that marked your status is exchanged for rough cotton work clothes that chafe against skin accustomed to luxury. The elaborate hairstyles that took hours to create are chopped short for safety around industrial machinery. They assign you to a munitions plant on the outskirts of Kyoto, a sprawling complex of concrete buildings and smoking chimneys that produces the shells and bombs Japan hurls at its enemies. The work is brutal, repetitive, and dangerous. Your hands, which once coaxed music from shamisen strings, now assemble explosives under the supervision of men who measure productivity in units per hour rather than artistic perfection. The other workers, mostly women and old men, watch you with mixture of curiosity and resentment. They know what you were, and some blame you for the luxury you represented while their families scraped by on subsistence wages. Others feel sorry for you, understanding that your fall from privilege to factory labour is more precipitous than anything they've experienced. A few recognize that you're all victims of the same system that treats human beings as resources to be deployed wherever they generate the most value for those in power. Your geisha sisters are scattered across different facilities, their locations determined by bureaucratic efficiency rather than human relationships. Matsuko-san, already dismissed from the Okiya before the war, disappeared entirely when the evacuation orders came. Yukiko-san was assigned to a textile plant producing military uniforms, her youth making her valuable for work requiring fine motor control. The bonds that sustained you through years of shared struggle are severed as completely as if death had taken your sisters. The work routine is punishing in ways that geisha training never prepared you for. You rise before dawn to begin shifts that stretch deep into the night, assembling munitions under artificial lights that burn your eyes and breathing chemical fumes that sear your lungs. The precision required is similar to what you learned as an entertainer, but the stakes are different. A mistake in shamisen playing might earn disapproval. A mistake with explosives can kill everyone within 50 feet. Your supervisors, men who would never have spoken to you as equals during your geisha career, now order you around with the casual authority of people who understand that the war has eliminated all previous hierarchies. The beauty that once granted you influence means nothing in a factory where value is measured by productivity quotas. The cultural refinement that distinguished you from common workers becomes irrelevant when everyone is reduced to their capacity for manual labor. The bombing raids increase in frequency and intensity as American forces close their grip around Japan. When the sirens sound, you rush to concrete shelters with your fellow workers, huddling in darkness while explosions shake the earth above. These moments of shared terror create bonds different from anything you experienced in the geisha world. Connections based on mutual vulnerability rather than professional competition. During one particularly severe raid, the munitions plant takes a direct hit that kills 17 workers and injures dozens more. You survive only because you were assigned to a different section that night. But the randomness of your luck highlights how completely your fate now depends on forces beyond your control. The war has reduced everyone to the same basic situation, trying to survive until tomorrow, while producing materials for a conflict that grows more hopeless with each passing month. The propaganda that fills the factory's public address system speaks of sacrifice for the emperor, of honor found through service to the empire, of victory achieved through dedication and hard work. But the reality you observe daily contradicts these messages. The weapons you're producing are increasingly crude, made from inferior materials by workers who are exhausted, undernourished, and demoralized. The war effort is sustained by desperation rather than strength, held together by inertia rather than purpose. Your body changes under the pressure of industrial labor. The soft hands that once gestured elegantly while serving tea become calloused and scarred from handling metal and chemicals. The graceful posture developed through years of training gives way to the hunched shoulders of someone who spends 14 hours a day bent over an assembly line. The pale complexion, maintained through careful makeup application, darkens under factory lights and chemical exposure. But the most profound change is psychological. The skills that once defined your identity, the artistic accomplishments that justified your existence, become memories that feel increasingly unreal. The woman who could command a room with a perfectly timed gesture, who could influence powerful men through subtle conversation, who could embody ideal beauty through hours of careful preparation, seems like someone you once knew rather than someone you once were. Food becomes an obsession that replaces all others. The elaborate cuisine that once surrounded your performances is replaced by rice rations that shrink monthly and vegetables that taste like paper. You learn to save every grain, to appreciate flavors you would have scorned during your days of abundance. Hunger becomes a constant companion that makes luxury seem not just distant, but immoral. Letters from the outside world stop arriving as communication systems break down under wartime pressure. You lose contact with anyone who might remember your previous life, anyone who could confirm that the geisha you once were actually existed. The isolation becomes complete, cutting you off from your past while offering no clear path toward a future worth imagining. The other geishas in your factory, the few you encounter during shift changes or meal breaks, are changing too. Their stories mirror your own. Identities dissolved, skills made irrelevant, lives reduced to the basic mechanics of survival. You recognize each other by subtle signs, the way someone holds her hands or maintains posture even under exhaustion. But you don't discuss what you've lost. Speaking of the past makes the present harder to endure. As 1945 progresses and Japan's situation grows increasingly desperate, the factory work becomes more frantic and less rational. You're producing weapons with materials that wouldn't have been considered acceptable earlier in the war, assembling devices that may not function properly, but must be completed to meet quotas that someone in a distant office has decided are crucial for victory. The flower and willow world, with its silk screens and painted faces and elaborate rituals of aesthetic perfection, seems like a fever dream from another century. The woman who once moved through tea houses like a work of living art has been replaced by someone whose primary skill is assembling explosives quickly enough to avoid punishment from supervisors who are themselves under pressure to meet impossible production targets. And in the dark moments between exhausted sleep and the morning siren that calls you back to the factory floor, you understand that even if the war ends, even if Japan somehow survives the catastrophe its leaders have created, the world you once knew is gone forever. The geisha system, built on aesthetic refinement and cultural sophistication, cannot exist in a society that has learned to measure everything by its utility for mass destruction. You are witnessing not just the end of a war, but the death of an entire way of life, the final transformation of a woman who was once living art into someone whose only value is her capacity to build weapons for a cause that grows more hopeless with each passing day. The silence after surrender is more deafening than any air raid siren ever was. August 15th, 1945, and Emperor Hirohito's voice crackles through radio speakers, speaking words that no Japanese citizen ever imagined hearing: defeat, occupation, the end of everything your nation claimed to represent. You stand in the factory courtyard with hundreds of other workers, still wearing the rough cotton uniform that replaced your silk kimono, watching supervisors tear down propaganda posters that promise victory through sacrifice. The Americans arrive in September, and with them comes a different kind of transformation. Kyoto, spared from the atomic bombs that obliterated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, becomes a living museum for the occupying forces, a place where they can observe traditional Japanese culture without the inconvenience of radioactive rubble. The flower and willow world, which the war had seemingly destroyed forever, suddenly becomes valuable again, but for entirely different reasons. The occupation authorities need cultural ambassadors, living examples of refined Japanese femininity, who can help bridge the gap between conqueror and conquered. They want geishas, but not the complex, powerful women who once influenced political decisions through subtle manipulation. They want something simpler, more accessible, more aligned with American fantasies about exotic Oriental entertainment. They want performers who can smile pretty for photographers and ask no uncomfortable questions about why their country lies in ruins. Your Oka-san, who disappeared during the war's final months, returns with stories of survival that she shares with no one. She's made contact with occupation officials who are interested in restoring certain cultural institutions as part of their democratization program. The tea houses can reopen, she explains, but under new management and with new purposes. Instead of serving Japanese power brokers, they'll entertain American officers and their guests. Instead of facilitating complex negotiations between industrial families, they'll provide exotic atmosphere for victory celebrations. The transformation required to rebuild the geisha world is more radical than what the war demanded. You must learn English phrases that reduce your artistic training to simple entertainment categories. I sing Japanese song for you. You like Japanese dance. Please enjoy sake, American-san. The complex poetry that once demonstrated your intellectual sophistication is replaced by broken conversation designed to make foreign soldiers feel worldly and cultured. Your fellow survivors return one by one, each carrying scars that run deeper than the physical marks left by factory work. Yukiko-san comes back from her textile plant 20 pounds lighter, her youthful beauty aged beyond her years by malnutrition and chemical exposure. Others don't return at all, lost to bombing raids, factory accidents, or the chaos of a collapsing society. The sisterhood that once supported you through professional competition now reunites around shared trauma that no one discusses directly. The new geisha training begins immediately, but it's a hollow echo of what came before. The American officers want spectacle rather than subtlety, entertainment rather than artistry. You learn to apply makeup more heavily, to make your smiles broader, to present yourself as an exotic curiosity rather than a sophisticated artist. The dances you perform are abbreviated versions of classical forms, stripped of their cultural context and presented as colourful ethnic exhibition. The clients who fill the reopened tea houses are unlike any you served before the war. American servicemen flush with victory, their uniforms crisp, and their wallets full of occupation currency. They don't understand the ritual significance of tea ceremonies or the symbolic meaning of seasonal poetry. They want photographs to send home, stories to tell about their conquest of Japanese culture, memories of exotic experiences that will distinguish their war service from that of men who served in European theatres. Some of the officers are genuinely interested in learning about Japanese traditions, approaching your performances with respectful curiosity about art forms their own culture lacks, but most view you as living souvenirs, human trophies that confirm their superiority over a defeated people. They tip generously, but expect gratitude that goes beyond professional courtesy. They compliment your beauty while making it clear that they consider themselves entitled to access by right of conquest. The conversations you overhear now are about reconstruction rather than military strategy, about how to remake Japan in America's image rather than how to project Japanese power across the Pacific. The men who once whispered state secrets in your presence have been replaced by occupation administrators who discuss their plans for democratizing Japanese society with the casual confidence of people who believe they understand cultures they've never bothered to study seriously. The economic structure of the new geisha world is designed to benefit the occupying forces rather than the women who provide the entertainment. The fees charged to American clients are higher than what Japanese patrons ever paid, but most of the money flows to occupation-approved management companies rather than to the performers. You're paid wages similar to what factory workers earn, a fraction of what your artistic skills commanded before the war. The kimono you wear now are machine-manufactured approximations of the hand-painted masterpieces that once defined your professional wardrobe. The silk is synthetic, the patterns standardized, the craftsmanship adequate for photographs, but lacking the subtle perfection that once marked the difference between art and costume. You're dressed like a geisha rather than being one, wearing a uniform that signifies a role rather than expressing an identity. The American photographers who document the restoration of traditional Japanese culture position you like mannequins, arranging scenes that look authentic to eyes unfamiliar with the original traditions. You pose with fans spread at angles that would have been considered crude in the real flower and willow world, smile with expressions that no properly trained geisha would have displayed for public consumption, perform dances on stages rather than in intimate settings where they belonged. The most disturbing aspect of this cultural resurrection is how quickly you adapt to it. After years of factory labour, even this degraded version of geisha work feels like a return to your natural element. Your hands remember how to hold a shamisen. Your body recalls the classical dance forms. Your voice finds the musical qualities that once made your conversation enchanting. The skills are still there, but they're being used for purposes that have nothing to do with their original meaning. The other performers struggle with similar adaptations, each finding different ways to reconcile their training with the demands of occupation-era entertainment. Some maintain internal dignity by preserving classical techniques while adapting to simplified presentation requirements. Others embrace the new accessibility, finding relief in performances that require less psychological complexity than the political theatre of pre-war geisha work. A few retreat into bitter professionalism, delivering exactly what's requested, while making it clear that they understand the degradation they're participating in. The Japanese clients who occasionally appear in the rebuilt tea houses are different too. The powerful men who once treated you as equals in sophisticated cultural exchanges have been replaced by black market dealers, collaboration profiteers, and others who found ways to prosper under occupation. They approach you with a combination of nostalgia and shame, seeking connections to a defeated culture while trying to distance themselves from its failures. These Japanese patrons often seem more foreign to you than the American officers do. The Americans, at least, are honestly ignorant about what they're experiencing. The Japanese clients know what the flower and willow world once represented, understand how completely it's been transformed, and participate anyway. Their presence feels like a form of cultural grave robbing, a consumption of traditions they know they're helping to destroy. The training of new geishas under the occupation becomes an exercise in cultural ventriloquism. You teach young women to perform abbreviated versions of arts you once spent years mastering, showing them how to create the appearance of traditional refinement without the substance that once gave it meaning. These apprentices will never experience the complex psychology of wielding influence through apparent powerlessness, because they're being trained for straightforward entertainment rather than cultural manipulation. The city around you rebuilds with American efficiency and Japanese desperation, but the Kyoto that emerges bears little resemblance to the one that was destroyed. The narrow streets of Gion are wider now, designed for American automobiles rather than traditional processions. The tea houses that reopen do so with electric lighting and Western-style seating options. The flower and willow world is being preserved as a tourist attraction rather than revived as a living culture. And you, survivor of 15 years of traditional training, followed by 2 years of wartime labour, find yourself trapped between worlds that no longer exist. Too old to start over in conventional society. Too marked by experience to believe in the innocence that the new geisha role requires. Too skilled in obsolete arts to find other work. Too aware of what's been lost to participate fully in what's being built to replace it. The occupation will end eventually, but you understand that the changes it's brought are permanent. The geisha who emerges from this transformation will be someone entirely different from what you once were. someone designed to serve the needs of a world that has no use for the subtle complexities that once made your life both powerful and meaningful. In the mirror, your reflection shows someone wearing the costume of your former self, performing a role that shares a name with what you once were, but represents something completely different. The war destroyed many things, but perhaps the cruelest casualty was the slow death of meaning itself, the way that everything authentic could be rebuilt as simulation. Everything profound could be repackaged as entertainment. The flower and willow world lives on, but only as a ghost of itself, haunting the ruins of a culture that learned too late that some things, once broken, can never be truly repaired. The neon lights of modern Kyoto flicker like artificial stars against windows that once knew only candlelight, and you stand at the threshold between worlds that have nothing in common except geography. It's 1975, 30 years since the war ended, and the Japan that has risen from the ashes bears no resemblance to the one that fell. You are 52 now, your painted face a masterpiece of artifice that conceals decades of adaptation, survival, and the slow erosion of everything that once gave your life meaning. The tourists arrive in buses now, cameras hanging around their necks like modern prayer beads, seeking glimpses of authentic Japanese culture that exists primarily in their imaginations. They photograph you walking through Gion as if you were part of the landscape, a quaint relic preserved for their entertainment. They don't understand that you're not maintaining tradition. You're performing its ghost for people who wouldn't recognize the real thing if it danced before them in perfect silence. The young women who call themselves Geishas today learned their craft from instruction manuals and weekend workshops, rather than through the brutal, transformative process that created you. They wear machine-made kimono and synthetic wigs, smile for photographs without understanding that mystery was once more valuable than accessibility. They speak of their art while booking appointments through telephone exchanges and advertising their services in tourist guidebooks like any other commercial entertainment. You watch these modern performers with the complex emotions of someone observing her own funeral. They've taken your professional name, your costume, even some of your gestures, but they're playing characters in a cultural theme park rather than living the disciplined life that once defined every moment of your existence. They call themselves Geishas, and perhaps they are, but they're geishas designed for a world that values convenience over mystery, photography over poetry. The tea houses that survived the war and occupation have been converted into tourist attractions that charge admission for experiences that once required years of cultivation to access. Visitors pay fixed rates for predetermined entertainment packages, 30 minutes of traditional music, a brief dance performance, posed photographs in authentic settings. The elaborate negotiations between patrons and establishments, the complex hierarchies of status and access, the subtle power dynamics that once made every interaction a form of diplomatic theatre, all have been replaced by simple commercial transactions. Your role in this new ecosystem is that of a living museum piece, valuable primarily for your authenticity in a world increasingly filled with imitations. The few remaining clients who remember the old ways seek you out specifically because you represent something that no longer exists anywhere else. But even these encounters feel hollow, like trying to perform Shakespeare for audiences who've forgotten the language the plays were written in. The modern world intrudes on traditional spaces with relentless efficiency. Air conditioning hums where braziers once provided warmth. Electric lights eliminate the soft shadows that once helped maintain mystery. Recorded music plays when live performers aren't available, reducing art to background atmosphere. The technological conveniences that make contemporary life easier also make the psychological space necessary for traditional geisha culture impossible to maintain. Your own apartment, a modest space that would have been unthinkable luxury during your apprenticeship, reflects the strange compromises of your current existence. Traditional elements like tatami mats and shoji screens coexist with modern appliances and Western furniture. You dress in Western clothes for daily life, but maintain the elaborate kimono collection required for professional appearances. You live simultaneously in multiple time periods, never fully belonging to any of them. The young women who seek training from you arrive with motivations that would have been incomprehensible to previous generations. Some are university students studying cultural preservation, who approach geisha arts as academic subjects rather than life paths. Others are foreign women who've romanticized the profession through movies and novels, seeking exotic experiences that will enhance their personal narratives. A few are Japanese women looking for part-time income that seems more interesting than conventional service work. None of them understand what they're asking when they request instruction in traditional techniques. They want to learn the external forms without accepting the internal transformation those forms were designed to produce. They practice shamisen playing while maintaining independent social lives. They study classical dance while planning conventional careers. They learn conversation techniques while refusing to surrender their opinions, preferences, and personal desires to the requirements of professional perfection. The teaching becomes an exercise in cultural translation, trying to explain arts that were created for psychological environments that no longer exist. How do you teach someone to move with perfect grace when they're not willing to spend years unlearning natural movement? How do you explain the importance of subtle suggestion to people who've been raised to value direct communication? How do you convey the power of apparent powerlessness to women who've been taught that submission is oppression? Your few remaining geisha sisters have adapted to the modern world with varying degrees of success. Some have opened cultural schools that teach abbreviated versions of traditional arts to paying students. Others have married and retreated into conventional domestic life, their extraordinary training reduced to party tricks they perform for friends and relatives. A few have disappeared entirely into the anonymous crowds of contemporary Japan, their identities as thoroughly erased as if they'd never existed. The conversations you have with these women when you occasionally encounter them carry the weight of shared understanding that can't be communicated to outsiders. You speak in the coded language of people who've survived cultural extinction, referencing experiences that have no contemporary equivalent. These meetings feel like secret gatherings of survivors from a war that history has decided to forget. The media attention that occasionally focuses on your profession approaches it from angles that miss the essential points entirely. Journalists write about the mystery of geisha culture while photographing it extensively, document the traditions while interviewing practitioners who learned their skills in weekend workshops. They present you as either feminist pioneers who wielded power through performance or as victims of patriarchal oppression, unable to understand that the reality was far more complex than either interpretation allows. The modern feminist movement views your life with a mixture of horror and fascination, seeing you as either a cautionary tale about women's exploitation or an example of female empowerment achieved through unconventional means. But their frameworks can't accommodate the reality of a profession that required the complete surrender of individual identity in service of achieving a different kind of agency. You learn to wield enormous influence, but only by becoming someone who couldn't exist independently of the role she performed. The question of whether your sacrifices were worthwhile becomes impossible to answer as the world that might have justified them disappears completely. The skills you developed at such enormous personal cost have no application in contemporary society. The influence you once wielded was valuable only within structures that no longer exist. The artistry you achieved was meaningful only to audiences who understood the cultural codes you were manipulating. Young Japanese women today pursue careers in business, medicine, technology, politics, achieving forms of direct power that would have been unthinkable during your youth. They make choices about their own lives, express their authentic personalities, pursue romantic relationships based on mutual affection rather than economic calculation. They live with freedoms that you couldn't even imagine when you were their age. But they've lost access to the profound aesthetic experiences that once made your constrained existence feel meaningful. The tourists who photograph you walking through Gion in the evening light have no idea that they're documenting the end of something rather than its preservation. You are among the last women who underwent the complete transformation that created real geishas, who lived the psychological complexity that made the profession more than simple entertainment. When you and your few surviving sisters die, the knowledge of what that experience actually involved will die with you. The kimono you wear for public appearances feels heavier now, weighted with the responsibility of representing something that no one fully understands anymore. Each formal engagement requires you to embody not just your own professional identity, but the entire cultural tradition that created you. You perform not just as an individual entertainer, but as a living artifact, a human museum piece whose value lies primarily in her ability to evoke nostalgia for experiences that contemporary audiences never had. In quiet moments, usually late at night after the performances and photographs and polite conversations with people who see you as a curiosity rather than a person, you wonder what your life might have been like if you'd been born into a different century, a different culture, a different set of circumstances. But these thoughts lead nowhere useful, because the person who might have lived such alternative lives was erased so completely during your transformation that she exists now only as a hypothetical, a ghost haunting the memories of someone else. The city lights of modern Kyoto spread beneath your window like a vast electronic constellation, beautiful and alien and utterly removed from the world of shadows and suggestion that shaped you. You are a masterpiece created by a civilization that no longer exists, practicing arts that have no audience, maintaining standards that serve no purpose except the abstract ideal of preservation itself. And in that preservation, perhaps, lies a form of victory more subtle than anything the flower and willow world ever achieved. You endure not because the culture that created you continues to thrive, but because refusing to disappear entirely represents a kind of resistance against the forces that would erase all evidence that such complexity was ever possible. The neon lights flicker. The tourists continue their pilgrimage through reconstructed authenticity, and you remain, the last witness to a transformation so complete that even its memory survives only in the movements of hands that learned their grace through suffering, that the modern world has decided to forget. The mirror holds no mercy, and at 63, you finally understand that the painted face looking back has become more real than whatever lies beneath it. Your hands shake slightly as you apply the white base, the tremor barely visible but unmistakable to someone who has performed this ritual for over 50 years. The powder settles into lines that weren't there yesterday, or perhaps you're simply seeing them for the first time. The face of the geisha is eternal, unchanging, perfect. The face of the woman wearing it tells a different story entirely. Your body rebels against the demands you've placed on it for decades. The elaborate kimono that once felt like a second skin now weighs on your shoulders like grief. The obi that shaped your silhouette into perfect proportions cuts into flesh that can no longer sustain such compression without pain. Your feet, deformed by years in traditional footwear, ache with every step down the narrow streets of Gion. The graceful movements that once seemed effortless require conscious effort now, each gesture a small victory over the physical limitations that accumulate like interest on a debt you never agreed to pay. The doctors speak in the careful language that medical professionals use when discussing conditions that won't improve. Osteoporosis from years of calcium-poor wartime rations, lung damage from factory chemicals and decades of incense smoke, arthritis in joints, stressed by unnatural postures maintained for performances, hearing loss from shamisen strings played too close to your ears for too many years. Your body is a catalogue of the costs that beauty extracted, a ledger written in pain that only you can read. But the physical deterioration is easier to accept than the psychological erosion. The skills that once defined you are slipping away like water through broken pottery. You forget the lyrics to songs you've performed thousands of times. Your fingers hesitate over shamisen strings, searching for positions that once came automatically. The intricate social calculations that allowed you to navigate complex gatherings now require effort that leaves you exhausted. You're losing the ability to be the thing you spent your entire life becoming. The few clients who still seek your services do so out of nostalgia for their own youth rather than appreciation for your current abilities. They're elderly men now themselves, contemporaries who remember when you were at your peak and are willing to overlook present limitations for the sake of shared memories. These encounters feel like reunions between survivors of a disaster that no one else remembers. Conversations conducted in a language that has no living speakers except yourselves. Your Okasan, now in her 80s, moves through the Geisha house like a ghost, haunting its own former life. Her authority, once absolute, has been gradually transferred to younger women who understand modern business practices, but lack her intuitive grasp of the profession's psychological subtleties. She still commands respect, but it's the kind extended to historical artifacts rather than active decision makers. Her advice is sought for ceremonial occasions, but ignored for daily operations. The house itself is dying around you both. The expensive maintenance required to preserve traditional architecture becomes harder to justify as revenue streams dry up. Tourists prefer newer establishments with better amenities and more convenient locations. The elaborate tea ceremony rooms gather dust, while visitors book simplified experiences that can be conducted in spaces designed for efficiency rather than authenticity. The building that once hummed with activity now echoes with emptiness. Rooms that once housed dozens of women left vacant and slowly decaying. Your Geisha sisters have departed through various exit routes that the changing world has opened. Some married clients who offered financial security in exchange for conventional domestic roles. Others transitioned into teaching positions at cultural centres or universities, their expertise valuable for academic study, if not for active practice. A few simply disappeared into the anonymity of ordinary life, their extraordinary training hidden like shameful secrets, rather than displayed as achievements. The loneliness becomes absolute in ways you never experienced, even during your most isolated moments as a young apprentice. Then, at least, you were surrounded by others who shared your situation, women who understood the complexities of your existence, even when they competed with you for advantages within it. Now, you're among the last practitioners of arts that require lifelong dedication to master, surrounded by people who appreciate your performances without understanding the sacrifice they represent. The modern Geishas, who occasionally seek your guidance, approach you with the respectful distance accorded to museum pieces. They want to learn specific techniques or gain credibility through association with authentic practitioners, but they're not interested in the philosophical framework that once gave those techniques meaning. They study your movements while rejecting the worldview that created them, seeking to extract techniques from contexts they consider outdated or oppressive. Your teaching becomes an exercise in cultural archaeology, attempting to reconstruct entire ways of being from fragments that survive in your memory. But the students lack the psychological preparation necessary to receive such instruction. They haven't undergone the systematic destruction and reconstruction of identity that was prerequisite to real Geisha training. They approach your arts as skill sets to be acquired rather than transformations to be endured. The questions they ask reveal how completely the world has changed. They want to know about work-life balance, about maintaining personal relationships while pursuing traditional arts, about adapting classical techniques to contemporary audiences. These concerns would have been meaningless to your generation, for whom the distinction between professional and personal identity simply didn't exist. You were geishas. You didn't perform geisha roles while maintaining separate selves who could retreat into private lives. The city government occasionally honors you at ceremonies celebrating Kyoto's cultural heritage, presenting you as living treasure whose presence validates their preservation efforts. These events feel like funerals for cultures that haven't quite died yet, formal acknowledgements of value that carry no commitment to meaningful support. You receive plaques and certificates that recognize your contributions to arts that the same officials allow to decay through neglect and misunderstanding. The media interviews become repetitive exercises in translation, journalists asking questions that assume frameworks you've never inhabited. They want stories about empowerment or oppression, about tradition versus modernity, about the meaning of your choices. But your life doesn't fit their categories. You didn't choose this path in any meaningful sense. You were shaped by it into someone for whom alternative choices became unimaginable. You didn't maintain tradition. You were transformed by it into something that could only exist within its boundaries. The photographs they take show someone who looks like a geisha, but can't quite capture what a geisha actually was. The visual elements are correct. The white makeup, the elaborate kimono, the formal posture. But the psychological complexity that once animated these external forms has been simplified into something more accessible to contemporary understanding. You've become a symbol of your own life rather than its actual embodiment. Your few remaining possessions tell the story of gradual diminishment. The kimono collection that once filled multiple rooms has been reduced to a few pieces suitable for special occasions. The musical instruments that once served daily practice now emerge only for performances or teaching sessions. The books of poetry and cultural instruction gather dust in rooms that no one visits. The material culture that once supported your profession has been dispersed, sold, or abandoned as its utility disappeared. The most painful moments come when you encounter reminders of what the flower and willow world once represented. Old photographs showing tea houses filled with guests engaged in sophisticated cultural exchange. Recordings of musical performances that demonstrate technical excellence your current abilities can't match. Documents describing social and political influence that practitioners once wielded through their apparent powerlessness. These artifacts feel like messages from a civilization that spoke your language, but has been dead for decades. The younger women working in modern interpretations of geisha entertainment sometimes ask about your experiences with curiosity that can't bridge the gap between your realities. They want to understand what motivated you to accept such constraints. what satisfactions you found in lives that seem oppressive by contemporary standards. But the question itself reveals the impossibility of communication. The person who might have made different choices was eliminated so completely during your training that she can't be resurrected even in memory. Your reflection in the mirror shows someone who has become a living memorial to her own transformation, a monument to processes that no longer exist and might never be repeated. The face looking back carries the weight of knowledge that will die with its bearer, secrets about what human beings can become when shaped by forces more powerful than individual will or desire. The white makeup covers everything now, not just natural colouring, but the entire history of a life that measured success by the completeness of its own erasure. You have achieved the ultimate goal of Geisha training, becoming so perfectly what others needed that your authentic self disappeared entirely, leaving behind only the flawless performance of someone who never was and never could be anything else. In the growing darkness outside your window, the lights of modern Kyoto continue their restless dance, but they illuminate a world that has no place for the kinds of beauty that require destruction to create. You remain as the last witness to that possibility, the final evidence that such transformations were once not only possible, but considered the highest form of artistic achievement. And when you are gone, even that evidence will fade into legend, leaving behind only questions about what might have been lost when the world decided that some forms of perfection were too expensive to maintain. The final curtain doesn't fall with dramatic flourish. It descends like dust on forgotten rooms, settling gradually until one day you realize that the performance has ended and no one applauds. You are 71 now, and the last tea house that still employed authentic geishas has closed its doors for the final time. The building will be converted into a boutique hotel where tourists can sleep in rooms where you once entertained ministers and merchants, their dreams untroubled by ghosts of conversations that shaped empires. Your hands can no longer hold shamisen strings without trembling. The white makeup that once transformed you into living art now emphasizes every line and hollow that age has carved into your face. The kimono that defined your silhouette hangs loose on a frame that has shrunk away from its former magnificence. You are becoming transparent, fading like ink in water, disappearing into the irrelevance that awaits all things that outlive their purpose. The young women who call themselves geishas today perform in restaurants and cultural centres. They're abbreviated shows designed for audiences who photograph more than they observe. They wear machine-made costumes and synthetic wigs, smile without mystery, dance without danger. They have preserved the visual elements of your profession while abandoning everything that gave those elements meaning. They are geishas in the same way that actors are the characters they portray, convincingly but temporarily. You sit in your small apartment, surrounded by remnants of a life that spanned the transformation of an entire civilization. The photograph albums show faces that no one living remembers, women who mastered arts that have no contemporary application. Your kimono collection, once worth fortunes, attracts interest only from museums seeking artifacts to display behind glass. The musical instruments that shaped your hands into instruments of beauty gather dust in corners where no one will ever play them again. The letters that arrive less frequently each year bring news of departures. Your last remaining geisha sister has entered a care facility, her magnificent mind clouded by conditions that modern medicine can slow but not reverse. Your few surviving clients send cards on traditional holidays, but their handwriting grows shakier with each correspondence. The threads that connected you to others who shared your experience are breaking one by one, leaving you isolated in memories that have no witnesses. But perhaps isolation was always your natural state. The training that created you was designed to produce someone who could be intimately present with others while remaining fundamentally alone. Someone whose deepest self was so thoroughly hidden that even you lost track of where it went. You spent 70 years in constant performance, so perfect in your artifice that authenticity became a theoretical concept rather than a lived experience. The modern world celebrates individual expression, personal fulfillment, the right to self-determination. These values make your life incomprehensible to contemporary observers who see only oppression where you experience transcendence. They cannot understand that you found liberation through complete surrender, that you discovered power through apparent powerlessness, that you achieved immortality by agreeing to disappear entirely into something larger than yourself. Your reflection in the mirror shows someone who has become a living paradox, the most successful geisha who ever lived, and the last person who understands what that success actually meant. You perfected arts that no longer have audiences, mastered skills that serve no contemporary purpose, embodied ideals that the world has decided were never worth pursuing. You are a masterpiece painted in a language that has no remaining speakers. The tourists who occasionally spot you on the streets of Guyane photograph you like a rare bird that has strayed from its natural habitat. They don't understand that they're documenting an extinction in progress, capturing the final moments of something that will never exist again. Their cameras preserve your image while missing entirely what that image once represented. They collect souvenirs of depth they cannot fathom. The cultural preservation societies speak of you in terms that make you feel like a living fossil, valuable primarily as evidence of what once existed rather than as a person who continues to exist. They want to interview you for archives that future scholars might consult, to record your techniques for students who will practice them as historical recreation rather than living art. They seek to preserve your knowledge while accepting that its context has died irretrievably. But what could you tell them that they would understand? How do you explain the psychological space where identity dissolves into performance so complete that the performer becomes indistinguishable from the performance? How do you describe power that operated through complete submission, beauty that required the destruction of everything natural, artistry that demanded the sacrifice of the self that might have created art spontaneously? The questions they ask reveal the impossibility of transmission. They want to know about your feelings, your choices, your personal experiences, concepts that had no meaning within the framework that shaped you. You didn't have feelings. You had techniques for producing the appearance of appropriate emotional responses. You didn't make choices. You executed decisions that were made for you by forces larger than individual will. You didn't have personal experiences. You had professional encounters that you managed with skills learned through decades of practice. The young scholars who study your profession approach it through academic frameworks that dissect its components while missing its essential unity. They analyze the music separately from the dance, the conversation apart from the costume, the social function distinct from the artistic achievement. But these elements were never separate. They were facets of a single transformation that created beings who could embody aesthetic perfection while wielding political influence through cultural performance. Your body is failing in ways that no amount of discipline can overcome. The movements that once flowed like water now require conscious effort that leaves you exhausted. The voice that could entrance audiences with subtle musical inflections has grown thin and uncertain. The hands that could convey entire conversations through fan manipulation shake too much to hold delicate objects. You are losing the physical capabilities that made your spiritual achievements possible. The medical professionals who monitor your declining health speak in terms of conditions and treatments, but they cannot address the fundamental problem. You are dying not just as an individual, but as the last representative of a way of being that the world has abandoned. When your heart stops beating, an entire form of human possibility will cease to exist. The knowledge you carry will become historical data rather than living wisdom. In your dreams, you sometimes return to the tea houses of your youth, where conversations that shaped nations unfolded around low tables lit by paper lanterns. You see the faces of powerful men who trusted you with secrets that could destroy governments, who sought your counsel on matters that would affect millions of lives. You remember the weight of responsibility that came with such trust, the skill required to influence without seeming to advise, to guide without appearing to lead. But these dreams feel like messages from another species rather than memories of your own past. The world those dreams inhabited was governed by principles that contemporary society has rejected entirely. Beauty was more important than comfort. Artistry mattered more than efficiency. The cultivation of aesthetic perfection justified any amount of personal sacrifice. Mystery was more valuable than transparency. These values seem as alien now as the social structures they once supported. The geisha you became was never meant to survive the culture that created her. You were designed for a specific historical moment, shaped by forces that no longer exist, to serve purposes that the modern world doesn't recognize. Your persistence beyond your intended lifespan makes you an anachronism, a living artifact whose presence in contemporary society feels increasingly surreal. Yet something in you resists the finality of disappearance. Not the ego that was systematically destroyed during your training, but something deeper, more essential. Perhaps it's the accumulated weight of all the beauty you embodied, all the artistry you perfected, all the impossible standards you somehow managed to achieve. These accomplishments demand witness, even if that witness is only yourself. You are the keeper of secrets that will die with you, the guardian of knowledge that has no heirs. You carry within your failing body the complete record of what human transformation could achieve when guided by principles that valued aesthetic perfection above individual comfort. You are living proof that such transcendence was possible, even if it is no longer desirable. The lights of modern Kyoto flicker outside your window, and you understand that you are watching them from across an unbridgeable gulf. You exist in the same physical space as the contemporary world, but you inhabit a different reality entirely. You are the last citizen of a country that has vanished so completely that even its ruins have been built over by societies that don't remember what once stood there. In the end, perhaps that is enough. To have existed at all, to have achieved something so complete and so impossible that its very existence challenges assumptions about what human beings can become. You were never meant to be understood by the world that succeeded the one that created you. Your purpose was to embody an ideal so perfect that it could justify the sacrifices required to achieve it. And you did. You became something that had never existed before and will never exist again. You transformed suffering into beauty, constraint into power, artifice into truth so profound that it transcended the individual who embodied it. You were a geisha, and that was everything, and that was enough. The performance is ending, but the artistry it achieved will echo in spaces where echoes can travel without sound, where beauty persists even after the eyes that could perceive it have closed forever. You are disappearing, but what you became was too complete, too perfect, too impossible to disappear entirely. In the silence that follows the final note, something eternal continues to resonate, audible only to those who learn to hear music in the spaces between sounds, who found meaning in the pauses between words, who discovered that the most profound truths can only be expressed through the complete surrender of everything that might have expressed them. The curtain falls, the lights dim, the audience disperses into lives that will never again witness what they have just seen. But the performance itself, the perfect embodiment of impossible beauty, continues somewhere beyond the reach of time, preserved in the only place where such perfection can survive the world that refuses to sustain it. In the eternal moment where artistry touches the divine, you remain, forever mysterious, forever beautiful, forever the answer to questions that no one remembers how to ask.